Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit today about understanding the mind, what the mind is. Because when we don't understand what the mind is and what thoughts are, we get into a cycle of confusion that just builds its own momentum and creates so much exhaustion and unease, unrest, hopelessness. But when we do get it, when it is understood what the mind is, like any system, then there's freedom and space and alignment, and the whole thing starts to become easy and straightforward. And so it seems to be that the mind works really brilliantly in two states. One is flow, where that whole creativity and alchemy and ideation and realization is working towards an output. The input is being generated by all the things that, all the resources of the mind, all the things that are known, all the experiences, all the events that have happened, all the memories. And it comes together. The mind does some magical alchemy, brings it all together to create an output. And that output could be a conversation, a blog post, a project, a building, a piece of music, a book, anything, literally anything. But the flow, that flow of input, alchemy, output is spectacular for the mind because it's being used, it's being utilized in its optimum way. It's being used in a reality that is all about flow. It's all about creativity. It's all about the use and generation of ideas and information to create something brilliant, perfect. And there's no confusion in that, because not at any stage in that is there anything that is there to be pushed against or battled against, or we're not trying to find a solution in things that cannot be solved. It's just this fluidity of creation. Brilliant for the mind. And we probably all experience that in certain moments when generally, I think, when we're doing the things that challenge us enough that there's no boredom, the mind doesn't sort of tail off into old wounds, old regurgitations, old rumination, old memories, and not so challenging that it doesn't start reflecting back on, I can't do this is too hard, this is not for me, what are they going to think of me? So there's that sweet spot, that sort of optimum flow space where the mind is sane, I think we could say. Either side, when it's too challenging and the mind is turning back in on itself, insane, because there it's reflecting back on something that isn't known. Like, what do they think of me? How will I come across? How will this affect my future? There's no answers anywhere in that, or so bored that it starts to drag up old stuff, old fixed things, stuff that we haven't resolved, stuff that the mind likes to try and settle on, to try and resolve when it can't. So this occupation of the mind is fabulous. And it doesn't matter whether we're a cleaner or a bricklayer or a train driver or a artist or a teacher or a speaker or a writer or a film director or a painter, whatever, there will be things when there's just that groove of creativity and occupation of the mind where it's stimulated and nourished, really. So that's one area where it's in its real optimum agency, we could say. And then the other areas when it's at rest. It craves that downtime as well, doesn't it? We crave sleep. So vital, that down. You think when the brain is so busy, using so much of the body's energy, it needs that down as well. So there's this fluid flow, creative space, and then there's that total rest. And those two are how the mind thrives. And it seems to be that the more of that's brought into the daily life of the mind, the better the whole system. And what we can see disrupts that whole system is the misunderstanding of what we are. Because when it's believed that this me that I think I am, my identity, is in control somehow of that creative output, or in control of the rest time, in control of when I go to sleep, when I wake up, the whole system goes a bit insane, really, because the identity isn't doing any of that. In fact, the flow, the beauty of that flow state is because in those moments, there isn't the insanity of me, my identity, me, Claire, the ego that is all controlling, all pervasive. It's not there. And that is incredibly restful for the mind, to not have that self-reflection, that constant rumination, because that continuous reference back to me sends the mind into a total spiral, because the mind can't find the me, because that me doesn't exist. It's just an idea. It's just a thought. And so the mind is spinning in on itself, trying to find answers, trying to find something fixed and objective and true, trying to find a solution, and it can't. Because and we see it, so the difference between that creative flow state and when the mind starts to seize up with thoughts of, what are they going to think about this, or what are they going to say about me? What will this do to my future? How can I do this considering my past? All these things that are brought in as apparently fixed real things, the mind has to try and deal with, but they're not. They're just creations of thought. And so there's no final resting place for the mind, no matter how hard it tries. It can't get anywhere. And so in all of this confusion, all that's happening is the mind is just exhausting itself. It's spinning around. It's not able to deal with things that aren't true, that aren't real, because all that comes in is another thought and then another thought. It's literally never ending. And that's all because there's a false center, and the false center is the idea of me. That the identity, the ego, is in charge of all this, and that these things exist separately from me. When actually, when we take out that identity, there is no longer a false center. There's no longer an illusory position for the mind to try and fathom. All there is then is flow. All there is flow. All there is creativity. All there is the meeting of what comes next. And it's the same with rest as well. When I think, when my idea of self, when this belief says, I need to control rest, I need to make sure I get a good night's sleep, I need to go to sleep at this time and wake up at that time, fresh and vital, then I'll be okay. But who is doing that? Who controls when sleep happens? Who controls when their eyes open and an awakeness happens? It's mad, really, isn't it, to think that there's a me doing that when there's really not. You know, we go from deep sleep suddenly awake. And in that deep sleep there wasn't any idea of me, and then suddenly awake. So what did the awakening? Yeah, it's just happening, isn't it? It's just happening. It's just the system doing it. And the more the system can run on actual reality, which is a reality without a fixed would-be controller that is all about lack, that is all about insecurity and need and fear. Without that, the system is free to thrive. With it, the system starts to spin around this thing that doesn't even exist. And there's confusion. That's all, there's confusion. And that confusion is hard to live with. It's exhausting. Yeah. So the mind does really, really well in reality. And when there's confusion, there's suffering. And so the suffering is a sign that what is trying to be managed right now is only thought, is only belief, it's not reality. Because the mind in reality is just that pure flow of creativity, pure flow of of imagination, of ideas, of resources coming together and unique output. That's the mind in its natural space, we could say, or in its aligned, unconfused space. Yeah. And same with rest, just rest happening, sleep happening, waking up happening. It's just how it is. Yeah. It's cool, isn't it? Thank you. Bye.